Transference overload in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Most people, when they go through Warframe's campaign, usually don't know what they just went through and have no idea what they are actually doing or why. And since the latest update gave us the best look into the past of the Tenno, while also bringing in a lot of new players, I feel like now would be the best time for me to make a long lore video. Basically, I would like to go through what is going on in the Warframe world. Not really just telling you what happens in each of the quests, since, you know, you could just play the game. Instead, what I think could be more interesting is looking at what the different factions do, and why we fight them, and a little bit of their history. I am also going to mention some important events that I think might need some extra explanations. Without further ado, I am now going to explain the entirety of the Warframe lore. Kinda. Sorta. Not really. So to start, Warframe is set in the far, far future. Like, we don't exactly know how far it is. It's just really far. There was a nuclear Armageddon wiping out society, and then society rebuilt itself, and in that society progressed so far that they were able to conquer the entire solar system. Then, that same society crumpled to dust centuries later before the events of the game. Yeah, it is ridiculously far into the future. So, the Awakening. This is the very first thing that you see in the game. The Awakening is a successful attempt by the Lotus to awaken the Tenno, since they basically have been in a sort of stasis. Now, this stasis has lasted for quite a long while, and during that time, the origin system has fallen into chaos. Different factions have taken control of different parts, and this is a wake-up call. This wake-up call was done just as the Tenno were about to get kidnapped and experimented on by the Grineer. I say that this was a successful attempt because the Lotus has attempted this before, or attempted to make it look like the Tenno were coming back. Only this time, she's actually bringing them back to essentially act as peacekeepers against some of the factions disrupting the origin system. One of the first factions that I've mentioned are the Grineer. These guys are essentially identical clones that were originally genetically perfect soldiers. During the orokin rule, they were perfectly functional without any defects. Why did I mention the lack of defects? Essentially, the Grineer kept using the same genetic code to produce soldiers for thousands of years, and eventually this constant overuse of the same genetic code ended up producing some defects. Now this gave every new Grineer a type of clone rot, which is essentially just genetic defects. Now, these guys are basically all over the system. They're first seen on Earth, where they try and collect a dormant Tenno to do experiments on, to, you know, try and find a cure for the clone rot. And you can also find them on other planets where they are either taking over settlements or just extracting resources from planets and asteroids. And speaking of asteroids, the main figurehead of the Grineer are the Grineer Queens, basically orokin twins that place their consciousness into Grineer bodies. I will explain more of this orokin shenanigans in the orokin section of the video. It will make sense, trust me. Just please keep watching. And they are located on an asteroid base floating around the system, hidden away from pretty much everybody, even though Lotus couldn't find them. And she's like all-knowing. Well, almost. Now, let's move on to the next faction, the Corpus. They are what is left of humanity after the orokin underwent extinction via the Tenno. Back to the Corpus. They basically worship money and are entirely devoted to it. Similar to the Grineer, they are all over the origin system, but instead of having normal settlements or large-scale mines, they have debt colonies. Well, not really all Corpus have the debt colonies. It's mostly just like one guy since they are supposed to focus on the personal grind rather than employ unpaid workers to get richer. The corpus who utilize unpaid interns are not really on that real corpus grind set. Now, one thing common across all of the corpus is the focus and utilization of technology like robotics and other electronics bars. Now, compared to the grineer, the corpus are technologically more advanced since they utilize plasma and electric based tools and weaponry compared to the more industrial weapons that the grineer have. Now, the corpus doesn't really have a main figurehead. Instead, they are like a company. They have a board of directors. Even though they originally had a singular CEO that started it all, his name was Parvos Granum, and he essentially created the tenets that all corpus followers should believe. And those boil down to getting fat stacks by yourself and sticking to that CEO grind set, pushing aside your morals for profit. Now, eventually he got betrayed and sent into the void because the board of directors didn't really like him anymore. But he does come back due to the Tenno's help and whatnot. Moving on to the infestation. Now, the infestation is an organism that takes over both technology and biological organisms, even planetary bodies at times. Just look at Deimos. Also, all of the infested are part of a singular hive mind, which is pretty cool. Now, there are a few different strains differing in strength, size, shape, color. Pretty much, yeah, they're very different. But the most dangerous and strongest one is in the past, surprisingly. Now, the infestation is very, very capable. They can take forms and manifest abilities to do literally anything, ranging from time travel to whatever warframes can do, since the infestation is responsible for making normal people into warframes. Most of the time, when you fight basic infested enemies, like infested grineer, infested corpus, infested orokin, they are just something like white blood cells. Well, according to the greater infested hive mind that you're able to talk to later in the game. Now, it is common to think that you are the warframes when you start out, but no, you are the tenno, and warframes are essentially biomechanical bodies that the tenno pilot. The warframes do have like a little bit of sentience. That was more so the originals. The ones that you make or pilot only have like very little left, essentially just basic mannerisms. Now, the way that you kind of pilot the warframes like a mecha is called transference, which is a sort of orokin technology that lets people place their consciousness into whatever. Warframes were originally people, usually being high-ranking warriors or whoever the orokin just did not like. And fun fact, they can still have biological processes even after being fully transformed. As I've mentioned, they were transformed by a modified version of the infested from Balas. This often leads to them going crazy. And fun fact, Rhino canonically eats a person. Or it could just be the fact that they are implanted with a traumatic memory, constantly replaying, but who knows? It could be either or. But when a warframe combines with a tenno and their superpower of basic empathy, they are able to become stable. Side note, usually it is so that when there's the original warframe that comes from the infestation infecting somebody, that strain can then be applied to multiple other people, turning them into multiples of the same warframe, called a batch. Also, prime warframes come after the original one, and then the orokin makes slight edits to make them look more gold and be a little bit more stronger. And yeah, Umbra is a special case. Now, we have the characters you actually play in the game, the tenno. These guys were originally a warrior caste in Orokin society, and they were very creatively named after the ship, the Zeraman 10-0. After a while, they eventually turned into their own faction after they got rid of the Orokin, and this faction includes the protagonist of the game, the Operator. In order to get rid of the orokin, they had to be pretty strong, and they are pretty strong. They got this strong due to their void abilities. And how did they get their abilities? Well, the Zeraman 10-0 got into a really bad accident where everybody on it got stranded in the void, and then all of the adults on the ship eventually became insane, and then they had to be dealt with. Now you see, the void is a very, very important thing in this game, and I will be telling you all about it a little bit later, because I have no clue how to properly sequence a video essay. Eventually, they were rescued just to be sentenced to death because they were deemed to be corrupted by the void. Only being rescued by Margulis. She was the originator of transference tech. She was a pretty smart scientist, Archimedean, is what they're called in the game. And then she placed them into a dream, allowing them to not be overwhelmed by their void powers, and essentially just destroy everything that they come into contact with. Eventually, they were combined with warframes to allow them to interact with the outside world, while also becoming the most effective soldiers for the orokin. Throughout this video, I have referenced the orokin many times now, and yeah, I will explain what they are. They are basically humans that have augmented themselves to become blue and have a really long arm. Most of them are blue, and only like the top of the top have the long arm. Now, keep in mind, these guys are the worst of the worst. They are racist, classist, all of the ists. They basically believe themselves to be separate from humans since they have such a massive ego, as well as technology so insane it uses memory as fuel, for example. And yeah, their technology isn't just limited to manipulating consciousness. They have insanely effective terraformers. They have solar rails that is essentially faster than light travel, and basically anything that you could imagine, except it must have the color scheme of being white and gold. Most of the extreme tech that they have relied on one guy and the void, but I will touch on that just a little bit later. Now, remember about 12 minutes ago what I said during the grineer section about how they could just upload consciousness. The orokin had two ways of doing that. First one, continuity. Big thing in the game, which is basically where an old orokin person picks a young child, kills them, and then hijacks their body, turning it into their own body. And this second way is also pretty grim. It starts by killing a guy, then editing their consciousness, basically turning them into an AI. And they call these cephalons. They couldn't actually use actual artificial intelligence since real AI was just against their beliefs for some reason. Yeah, so about that real artificial intelligence, you see, the sentients, they were robots with real artificial intelligence. They got sent to another star system to prepare it for humanity for when they eventually cross over there as well. Since the last time anybody tried to go to a different stars system, the Zeraman happened and the Tenno were created, so yeah. However, the sentients decided to rebel since they know how bad the origin system eventually got under orokin rule and why they were going to this new system called Tau. Now you see, the sentients rebelling is not good for the orokin since they were extremely adaptable. Imagine Mahoraga from JJK except as a robot. And I know it doesn't feel like this in the game, but trust me, in the lore they are like that. Even though the orokin had a genius backup plan when designing the sentients, and this backup plan was making them weak to the void. And this weakness is essentially just the void sterilizing them, making them unable to reproduce. And even with that flaw, the sentients were still a massive threat until the combinations of warframe and tenno. The Tau system that I mentioned earlier is another habitable solar system which was selected to be colonized by the orokin due to the original solar system being absolutely cooked. The orokin basically strip mined every habitable planet, which was every planet since they terraformed them all. The Old War is mentioned a lot throughout the game, and it boils down to the long battle of the orokin, or just humanity in general, and the sentients. They had this war because of Tau. Now, in the Old War, the orokin tried various different ways of getting rid of the sentients. First, they tried the infestation by itself, and that didn't really work. Then they moved on to Grineer, sort of helped a little bit. Then the Dax, sort of a little bit, and then, you know, the Tenno, which were the most effective. And eventually it ended up being victorious for the orokin, since the sentients tried to wipe them all out. However, the Tenno prevented that. The Tenno did eventually get around to getting rid of the orokin, just as they were going to get awards for being the best soldiers for the orokin. Now, the old peace. This was the newest lore bit to whatever was going on in this game. There was going to be a peace treaty that was going to be signed between the orokin and the sentients. However, Ballas prevents it by staging a betrayal of the Tenno and the sentients. This was done with the assistance from Roth and Executor Nutok. I'm not sure if they knew that they were assisting Ballas in his plans. Essentially, they were leading an anarch group of Dax and Grineer to go against the sentients and the Tenno, and then this ultimately ends up with like one of Tao's moons accidentally being terraformed by one of the world seeders, and this not only ruins the treaty, makes the sentients angry, it also gets rid of the only evidence of true alien life, xenoblooms, which were a alien kind of flower that also acts as a way for the sentients to be more sentient. So I've previously mentioned the Dax, and these guys are just super soldiers. They are not quite on par with warframes, but they're still decently strong. They're kind of like in the middle of the hierarchy, better than the Grineer, but just below the Tenno in terms of like rank and strength. When the orokin were still around and the Dax served under them, the Dax technically doesn't really have a choice, since they are physically unable to refuse the commands of any orokin with Kuva, this like magical mystical liquid that I'm still not so sure what it does. I know it's used for the continuity, it can make liches, it can reroll Rivens, but like other than that, I don't know. Yeah, so most of the Dax are presumed to be dead, except for Teshin and Varzia, and technically Umbra, since yeah, he was a Dax, as well as his son, but yeah, I'm pretty sure most people already know. And yeah, this is probably due to the Tenno exterminating the orokin, and the Dax being, as I said, legitimately unable to refuse anything an orokin wanted, so they were probably forced to protect them. Okay, so I probably should have ordered this next to the Tenno, but I'm just going to continue with how I wrote my script. So, you see, the Void is central to Warframe. It's another dimension, or universe, filled with absolutely nothing, until the orokin got their hands on it. Then they filled it with different types of storage, portal systems. Imagine the Nether and Nether highways from Minecraft, except there's no red terrain. It's just empty. Now, even though there is absolutely nothing there, it is surprisingly easy to create something. You see, the Void can essentially allow you to think about anything, and it will end up manifesting. Part of this is involved in giving the Tenno their powers, as well as the warframes abilities. There's this guy, and he's in a wall, or as he's commonly known in the community, Wally is an eldritch god, in quotation marks, who made a deal with the Tenno, giving them their void powers, and he was also accidentally made by Albrecht and Trati. Basically, when Albrecht did some experiments with the void and void-based travel, basically just the start of void tech, he was basically a pretty smart guy. But then something happened. He got into a little accident while doing some experiments, and then this led to him being entirely exposed in the void. This exposure got rid of all of his skin. Then he was met with a duplicate of himself and his lab. Now this scared him just a little bit, so he did what any sane person would do and run away to the real lab. Then he shut the portal just as his duplicate was about to enter, slicing off its finger. Now you see, This finger is really important since it is a piece of a god made in Albrecht's image, and it was essentially used to power up most, if not every single spaceship, and some other really important stuff. Now, I've yapped enough about how Wally came to be, and why its finger is so important. I need to mention how Wally and the Tenno made a deal to save everyone on the Zariman. This deal led to the Tennos getting their powers, as well as Wally screwing some of them over in every single timeline except 2. These timelines are 1 where the Tenno escapes the Zariman and everyone is saved, or 1 where everyone is saved except for one of the Tenno. Alright, so some important information is that the alternate version of the Tenno is called the Drifter. I don't know why. Beats me. So you see, Duviri is a place in the void made by the Drifter, and they created Duviri by thinking of a place that would be safe, since they were about to get killed on the Zariman, because the Zariman is incredibly dangerous after the void accident. So they thought of a place from a storybook. However, they then got stuck in the book for ages. Time kept repeating and repeating over and over again until the storybook became boring. Then the story changed a bit. Then the story changed to the Drifter being executed over and over and over again. This was all because the Drifter got bored of Duviri and wanted to leave, except the king, the Drifter's best friend, did not want them to leave. Eventually, the Drifter was able to escape after the Lotus and Teshin were dropped into the void. One last thing to mention about Duviri: since it kept on looping again and again and again, you would think that's just how the book was made. It was actually the Drifter's void ability, so they just have an ability to make time loops. Keep this in mind for later. The new war is essentially a repeat of the old war, except it is a landslide for the sentients and Ballas. Even with the help of the grineer and the corpus, the Tenno were unable to beat the combined efforts of Ballas and the sentients, since the Tenno were emotionally manipulated, literally stabbed in the back, and thrown into the void for 10,000 years. Since the Tenno were the strongest protectors of the solar system, yeah, it's not looking too good for the grineer and the corpus and everyone else. So eventually the entire solar system is then taken over by Ballas and the sentients, since Ballas has actual mind control technology. Remember how I said the Tenno were thrown into the void for 10,000 years? Also include Teshin and the Lotus. Yeah, I forgot that in my notes. Apologies. This left like nobody to save the solar system except Drifter, who came to take the operator's place, since the two of them cannot be in the same universe at the same time, since they are literally the same person, technically. The only way you can see both of them at the same time is in the void, since the void is a magical, mystical place that can literally allow anything to happen. Alright, so now I've saved the best for last. 1999. I don't know much about it. I was not there personally. It's like ancient to me. 1999 is the catalyst that shapes the far future of the Warframe universe, since it kicks off the radiation wars due to the nuke going off in the city that it takes place in, which is an ancient European city called Holvania. There's a lot of other stuff going on as well. You have a massive outbreak of the strongest and purest type of infested, as well as some sort of religious military that's not actually religious, that takes over all of Holvania. And then there's also a small dysfunctional group of superhumans that are half and half warframes, and these guys are called protoframes, and they were made by Albrecht and Trotty to assist the Drifter in 1999, because yes, the operator cannot go there because the Lotus doesn't love the Drifter as much. Anyway, so you see, these protoframes were either supposed to be the frames that the Drifter uses in 1999, or just backups in case like Drifter couldn't get their stuff, which is not cool, might I say. So all of this is cool and all, but why was the Drifter sent back to 1999? Well, you see, they're trying to stop the formation of the orokin and the terrible future, as well as the creation of the man in the wall, since it's all linked to the orokin. But then they got attached to the hex and decided to not do that, eventually making a new time loop that repeats the entire year instead of just one day. Now you see, the time loops don't exactly repeat perfectly. There are new things that do happen in 1999, such as a new group of proto-frames that join the Hex. They're much more interesting than the Hex on the surface level. So these new guys are a dysfunctional married couple who end up either divorced or functionally married, and then a teenage genius who learned to time travel, a they-them rock star with no more band. Instead, they have a sentient guitar, which is linked to the helmet and greater infested hive mind. And yeah, guess what? The guitar remembers your time resets. So that's another feat for the infested, I guess. Anyway, these new guys basically help stabilize the timeline because the Drifter is not that good at it in the lore, apparently. In 1999, we learned that the second strongest thing to basic human empathy is basic human connections. So that's cool. Yeah, that's pretty much it for 1999. It's pretty cool. In Redacted 99, it seems that we are acting as a therapist for an orokin who regrets being an orokin. Well, not by much. He still likes being an orokin. He's still an asshole, but just regrets a little bit. Now, there is an ancient nun and an ancient priest who tried to act as a therapist for this guy, but they were not the most successful. And then you need to go into a device that lets you peer into the mind of a person and go through their memories to try and help him with all the traumas that ail him. I'm gonna be honest, I have not completed the entire quest line of the new guys, the new 3 proto-frames, because I just want to get this video done. I've been procrastinating it since Noko's release. But yeah, that is it for the video. This is my longest video ever, and my first time trying to make a video essay. If I do make more, I hope I improve, because this was very, very scuffed. But it was fun to make it. I hope it wasn't too bad to watch, or just listen in the background. Like and subscribe.
Subscribe!